2015 and 2016 voted the most powerful man in Africa, consecutively by Forbes magazine. Take us through the journey in terms of where you started to the power that you exert over African economics and, I'd like to say as well, African politics today, sir.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here with all of you and to share my own small experience. Yeah, that's true. I started with cement in 1978. We traded almost, throughout the period up to 1989. 89, we started textiles, of which later we had to, abandon because of massive dumping, from the, Chinese and, Indian markets. But what we did, we concentrated on just trading. And in concentrating in trading, because we really wanted to see, okay, fine, what is it? Because we've seen quite a lot of people, in the past trying to go into industry. And trying to go into industry, they failed. Most Nigerian families that tried industrialization for a very long period of time, they couldn't succeed. And we really wanted to know, okay, fine, what was the reason? In 1995, we invited Arthur Andersen, then which is now KPMG and Accenture, to try and, we held a retreat for 2 days to try and find out, okay, fine, what was the reason? We had to go into that retreat because we accumulated a lot of cash between that 1978 to 2000 and to 1995. Reason being that we got to a point where we couldn't turn around our money over and over. There was just a limited amount that you could bring into Nigeria, and we're only trading then in Nigeria. So we decided that, okay, fine, look, we've actually reached end of the road. The only way for us is to industrialize, where we can now deploy more of our capital into industrialization. But then we're scared because we've seen a lot of companies that tried industrialization, they failed. And we wanted to know why. So we had this retreat led by Arthur Andersen, and two things came out clearly. The reasons why people have actually failed. There are two areas. One is lack of electricity power, shortage in Nigeria. And
just to elaborate on that, I used the stat yesterday, but 623 million Africans still do not have access to electricity. That is half the population.
That's true. So with that, we can go on and on. There are so many examples. If you look at it from the state that I came from, we have a population of about 23 million, and we're only having 40 megawatts of power. Wow. So almost everybody is a power producer, when you look at that. So with that now we realize that, yes, we had so much, because...
sorry, I interrupted your train of thought there. You said the first issue was lack of electricity, and
the second issue, that's right. So the second issue was inconsistency in government policies. Because you wake up in the morning, the government will change the regulation. Meanwhile, you had already invested. So it does not really give you that courage of even investing long term. So what we decided to do was say, okay, fine, can we sort out the electricity first, and also try to see how do we mitigate the inconsistencies in government policies. That one we don't have any control over, but the only way for us is to remain friendly with any government coming in, and also explaining things and also the benefit they are going to get. Because if you look at it today, in all our businesses that we don't, we've finished our tax holiday, government actually earns more money than us, the owners, when you look at it. Because the taxes are high, you pay different sort of taxes. So we decided that, okay, fine, let us now go ahead, and we want to be bold. But then how are we going to become successful? Are we going to now start afresh? Or do we just go on and produce goods that we used to import? So that's why we got it right. Now we just did the backward integration. by now producing goods that we are already trading in, because we already have the customer base, we have the logistics, we have all the infrastructure. And what we did was now to say, okay, fine, we're going to go and do cement, we're going to do, but we started with the terminal. A small story, for example, to tell you what we did in cement. We started the terminal. We opened a terminal December 2000. And was just one small terminal to import bulk cement and pack. Towards Christmas, I now went and met with Lafarge. It was Blue Cycle then, before they merged. That please, could you try and buy 40% of this business, and then you run it, but we keep the brand Dangote. They said, no, we want to have only, majority, minimum 51%. So it was a deal breaker. And we said, okay, fine, we are not going to agree. The money that they were supposed to pay me was less than $4 million. And so they backtracked on the deal, and we said, okay, fine, let us go ahead and face them. And within 2 years, we actually took chunk of the market, and now, we have a company worth over $18 billion.
And I'm sure Lafarge regrets that decision.
Definitely.
We're looking now at Dangote Group having a presence in 17 African countries, and it was the first West African country to enter the Forbes 2000 list.
Yes, but I mean, when we go forward, because part of the question, we want to also tell you that right now we're actually in a massive trajectory. We are now at about $4.2 billion of revenue, and in the next 2 years we'll be at $30 billion. So we are going into a massive transition, group-wide.
So accelerated growth, let's say, going forward, yes. And even more for Lafarge to cry about. Strive, let's come to you, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but Zimbabwean born, your mother was an entrepreneur, your father worked in a mine. At the age of 12, they had accumulated enough money to send you to school in England. You then continued with your education and as an engineer, came back into Zimbabwe and went to work for the state telecommunications operator, where you were very quickly promoted to senior positions, but frustration with a state-owned entity led you to start your own organization. Can you pick up from there?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. I also want to acknowledge Baba, President Obasanjo, who's played a great role in both our careers, Aliko would agree. But as you point out, I didn't start off as an entrepreneur. I started off as a professional telecommunications engineer at a time when all telecommunications in Africa and most of the world was run by the state. So we used to call them plain old telephone companies, POTS. So I was a POTS engineer. But that's about as funny as that got, because we didn't do very much. Zimbabwe at the time had one of the highest teledensities in Africa, which meant the number of people with a telephone. And ours was 1.4%. The average African teledensity was 0.7%. So that just gives you an idea of how many people had a telephone. If officially you got on the telephone waiting list, you could wait 35 years. And, so it was, we didn't do very much. So.
But that is where you must have seen the opportunity.
No, I didn't actually, because it was all under the state. So I left and went and started a construction company. But as technology would have it, about 5 years after I left, the whole mobile industry began to emerge. And what I quickly spotted was it was being driven by private enterprise. It was private entrepreneurs, particularly from the construction world, because they had to go out and build towers. So people like myself, Naguib Sawiris, and other buccaneers began to see that, this could be an opportunity for us. So I was watching what was happening globally, and I thought, well, I can just go over and persuade the government to give me a license. So I went and said, there's this great new technology. Would you give me a license and I can provide service to the people? And they almost locked me up as a national security threat. They said, you can't run telephone. This is about the state and our ability to monitor and control people. So we won't allow you to do it. So
You're persona non grata.
So not quite at that point, because they hadn't realized I could cause quite a bit of trouble. Because I then sued them, which had never been done. I hear the former president was not very amused when he heard that this little Turk was taking him to the Constitutional Court to challenge the premise of why you should have a monopoly in telecommunications. And I did it under a provision in our Constitution on the freedom of expression. I said, if 75% of the people have never even heard a telephone ringing, why do you have a monopoly? You must open it up so we can provide service to the people. And so it took 5 years before the Constitutional Court, and I brought down the monopoly. The court ruled that the monopoly was illegal. So then I was persona non grata.
Then you were persona non grata, but I want to also throw out the stat that the teledensity went from when you started 0.75% to 75% teledensity today across the African continent.
Yes, of course, and in
20
Zimbabwe
years.
it's 120%.
I'm not sure how the statisticians
So
work
I
that
don't know
out.
how that works out, but it just means that more people, some people have more than one phone. So obviously, a lot of us got involved. It became one of the great phenomenon. And of course, I ended up in Nigeria, courtesy of President Obasanjo. And we went there to get the revolution going. So it was a great revolution. 25 years on, 75% of the African people own a phone.
Often when we have great entrepreneurs on the stage, I don't think we go to this question quickly enough, and that is lessons learned, mistakes made. And Aliko, this is not the first time that I am asking you this question, but perhaps for our audience here today, again, if we're talking about establishing great businesses, there are those who say that you don't succeed if you haven't failed at least once or twice.
Well, I think mostly when you look at it, it depends on the government policies. Where now, when you look at it, I mean, my brother, Strive just talked about Telecom. Without the, aggressive nature, and not only the aggressive nature of also looking at, things outside the box, the telecom industry wouldn't have actually been, successful especially in Nigeria, because at the time they now came in Nigeria we have a tax rule which we don't offer any tax holidays or any incentive to services. But President Obasanjo was very, very creative. I mean, that's the truth. Not that because he's here. I didn't even know that he's sitting somewhere. But what he did was to say, okay, fine, let them also, because there was a claim that there was not going to be any profitability. And he said that, okay, fine, look, you know what, I'm going to give you 5 years tax holiday, even though it wasn't in the tax law. But as a president, he had the prerogative of approving a tax holiday, so which he did. And that was what even allowed them to come in, because the calculation then was, look, the entire country, both land and mobile, we had 500,000 lines.
Yeah.
Okay, in 2000. And today you are talking about 147 million lines. So you can see, so it depends on the government of the day, it depends on what you can convince them and what they really want to try to take to the next level. But our own, for example, today, like what I keep saying, there's a big difference between Africa and maybe Asia. Mainly when you look at Asian market, is a market of exports. But we have local demands. So there's demand in whatever that you do. You know, the opportunities are enormous because we're like an import continent. You know, we export mainly raw materials, and we import a lot of goods, which is why, you know, it costs us, it gives us a lot of imbalance in our foreign exchange situation.
So not many missteps in your history, mistakes
I think
that you learned from.
the missteps that we've had, you know, we've been always a very, very focused company. There are a lot of businesses that we have dropped, you know, along the line. For example, we're in banking, we had 2 banks, and we decided that, no, you know, it is much better for us. We are no professionals in terms of banking, you know, we are no professional bankers. So, and what we set as a rule in our company, any business that 10 of us in the company, top 10 of us, cannot wake up at night and explain to you the process from A to Z. We don't have business in being that business. I don't want to be in a business where somebody will sit me in the room and tell me how the process is. Because, you know, let me give you an example. In 2017, we had the toughest challenge of our time, 2016-17 in Nigeria, because of the fall in oil prices from 120 to $30
a barrel.
Dollars a barrel. And we said, okay, fine. So how do we then devaluation setting? How do we really retain and maintain our profitability? And we had a lot of shareholders. And all what we need to do is to go back into the trench. And I was arguing with the people running the operations and said that, no, we can actually cut a lot of our costs. We can even make much more money. When you look at it, all our companies, we actually doubled our income, minimum, compared to 2016, just because we know our business in and out. So that's the difference that we have. It's not, you know, and like, for example, apart from South Africa and Ethiopia, we are also power producers, but we don't sell power, we consume. And now it turns out to be that our power cost is just about 1/3 of the power cost of the national grid. And that is the reason why we are a much, much more profitable company than any company in Africa.
And that adage, of course, is reiterated. Well, I suppose Warren Buffett came out with it from the first place in the investment space. Don't invest in companies that you don't understand. And I think that
yes,
very much underpins Gateway Partners' philosophy as well in terms of investing in companies. How did Shankar put it? Biscuits and bread rather than Bitcoin. And the other element was cement and caviar. Not caviar. Cement rather than caviar. So there we go. Strive, let's pick up on that issue that I said about mistakes being made and learning from them. There were a lot of people in this room yesterday who didn't hear or weren't here yesterday and didn't hear about your Nigerian experience, which is well documented, but I think it's very important that we have that shared commonality with Nigeria. And your first experience wasn't a positive one, although President Obasanjo, we will have the pleasure of speaking to you later, sir. And again, your policies were much celebrated over the 2 terms that you were president in Nigeria.
Sure. Well, look, you know, my brother comes from the biggest African country, and I come from one of the smallest. So one of the first things you realize when you come from a small country is that you're not going to grow very big unless you leave. So you know, you can achieve a lot in Nigeria without ever stepping out of Nigeria. But and I know you'll understand this from Singapore, you got to quickly start looking beyond your own borders. And in my case, of course, I also didn't need a lot of encouragement because I was literally booted out. So I left Zimbabwe in 2000, and actually I haven't had an opportunity to get back since. I've been quite busy. So I moved to South Africa. And I began to, from South Africa, to look at how do I get into the rest of Africa. And you've got to bear in mind that we don't do much intra-trade between ourselves as Africans, which is a major issue.
I think it's at about 14%,
we're
depending
about
on what stat. 16%, up 2%.
Intra-trade compared to what in Asia you are 48-50% intra-trade. So it was not common for Africans to begin to look for opportunities within Africa as Africans. It was almost quite exotic. People were more used to seeing Germans and Italians pitched up. Yeah. When Nigerians and Zimbabweans pitched up, our own people thought we were crooks. Or they would say, what's wrong with your own country? I remember being asked that at the border post, why are you here? I'm come to invest. What's wrong with your own country? So it was difficult in the sense to be, I didn't realize how difficult it would be for us to go out to other African countries and look for opportunities. We also didn't have access to capital because our capital doesn't move. So we can't invest from one country to another except if you're South Africans. So you may have the capacity in one place to do something, but when you arrive in another country, that capacity isn't available to you. You're literally having to start again.
No, you're right. There are also some reasons when you look at it.
Correct.
Because we as Africans, because it's not normal. Yes. And you're right. This thing you mentioned, when I went with former President Obasanjo, he left office. 10 days later, we went to Tanzania. And when I went to Tanzania and announced an investment of $400 million to build a cement plant, they said, okay, these Nigerian crooks, they have come again. So they never really believed that, yes, an African will invest in Africa. I mean, if you look at it today, our investment in South Africa or in Tanzania were actually the biggest African investors. But there is quite a lot of areas that we have to look at. If you look at it, majority of those areas, they've been controlled over 40, 50 years by foreigners.
That's right.
By mainly Europeans. So when you go in there, they will do whatever it takes. Most countries that we've actually gone to, we've ended up to the Supreme Court.
That's right.
So there's still an element of suspicion.
Oh yeah, there is, of course. I mean, but you just have to be very, very strategic of how you handle the, situation. But you get there. I mean, we've had issues when we are going in, but now most of the countries that we have entered actually will be in number one. But they will give you a long run.
It's still not an easy process.
No, it's not.
He's
right. It's very, very difficult because there are people that they've been there. I mean, for example, I don't want to mention the name of a country, but there's a country we wanted to do our cement. The chairman of the company, still is the Minister of Finance. So Minister of Finance is the one that will issue all our incentives and whatever. But we still went ahead. I met the president during the time when Obama arranged this meeting with Africa, and the president called me by the side and said, okay, are you the same Dangote? I said, yes. He said, well, you are a real fighter, and I think you should carry on fighting. But he couldn't come out and say it in his own country.
Well, there's synergy there, because you were a fighter when it came to Nigeria.
Sure.
Can you quickly fast track to the end of that story? You head-tailed out of there, but it took you 10 years. You paid $285 million for a telecommunications license. And then you were presented with a bribe, which you refused to pay, of $4 million by the governor, who threatened to throw you out if you didn't pay it.
Well, he pretty much did. So, you take those kind of threats pretty seriously. Somebody's got a couple of guns at his disposal. So I did leave. I'm not going to fight with guns. So, I persisted. I took the matter to international arbitration, as I was saying yesterday. And to be fair, and this is the other thing, the arbitrators were appointed by Nigerian courts. And they were majority Nigerian judges. And we went before several arbitral hearings. Every single one of them ruled on by Nigerian judges in our favor, to the very end of the process. So again, there is a legal framework. Don't let people mislead you otherwise. We stayed in those courts. Of course, it was a little long, but it can be long in India too, or Indonesia. You know that.
And I
That's
think
international
Strive
practice.
and Aliko, that brings us to a point of persistence. What you need in terms of investing across the African continent, as in other frontier markets, is a level of persistence, understanding that the rules and regulations across the 54 countries in Africa are very different, as you've both just described.
Oh, yeah.
It is not easy to apply one set of rules and replicate that in other countries.
It doesn't work.
But I also want to get to the point now where we've spoken about the corruption. Where are we in that scale? Because I want to understand how we've progressed, how you as leading businessmen across the African continent are engaging or negating the element of corruption. Do you still get faced with it at this juncture in Africa's story? A quick comment from both of you.
Well, yes, you still do, but it's not only in Africa, even other countries. The only thing is that you just have to learn to say no. You know, I mean, once you say no and somebody knows that, yes, you are not going to do that. It might take you longer to get things done, you know, because you are not going to agree to, pay. Because especially, you know, the kind of companies that both myself and my brother Strive that we run, you can't really be involved in giving anybody, bribe. What we always do is that we don't even go and ask governments to give us anything outside what they normally do. We look for sectoral incentives, so which means that anybody who's going to invest in that sector, he's entitled to it. You know, they're not going to do anything special, to you. So if they are not going to do anything special to you, then you actually don't need to give anybody bribe to do, anything at all. So, but there are other countries. I mean, to be really fair, most of the countries that we went to, to establish our businesses outside Nigeria, only one country that actually, somebody asked us for a bribe, a minister.
So the situation has improved dramatically.
It has improved.
Strive?
Oh, yeah, it has improved dramatically, really. I mean, even the minister who asked me for a bribe, I reported him to the president. I said that, look, this guy asked me for money. He said that next time when I'm coming into the country, I should bring, a briefcase full of dollars. And I reported the case to the president, but we still didn't do the business there.
Strive, your experience?
Oh yeah, look, I'm actually sometimes stunned by just how dramatically the business environment has improved in Africa. It has really, really improved. It is much easier to do business. Look, corruption is there, but it's found all over the world, and we've got to fight it. Like I fought it in Nigeria, and the official involved, served a prison sentence. And so you've got to fight. Corruption takes two people. It's two parties. If you yourself decide you're not going to pay, that's it. It requires two. So if you're going to invest, but if you're looking for shortcuts, it doesn't matter where you are, you will end up in a corrupt deal.
So I think I'm going to leave it there on the corruption side. We know that corruption is prevalent all over the world, but I want to leave you with what Strive has said, and also has been, Aliko has concurred to the fact that the business environment in Africa has improved dramatically, and instances of corruption have dropped dramatically. Aliko, in the beginning, you said that it was Arthur Anderson that had done the survey, then it had turned to KPMG, obviously, and said that inconsistency of government policies and lack of energy were the two biggest challenges for businesses, and actually led to a number of failures in the business space. Let's talk about those two today, because again, in building a long-term business across Africa, these are two challenges that have not gone away, or have they? Let's start with the consistency of government policy. We have seen many transitions happening in the political space across Africa. As corruption is dissipating, are we seeing more political stability and consistency of policy, Strive?
Let me start with the power thing. That statistic that you shared, by the way, President Obasanjo, myself, and Aliko, working as what is called the Africa Progress Panel, were the people behind that report that produced that study.
Chaired by Kofi Annan at the time.
That's right, and the state of power in Africa. And it just shows you one of the things that we try to do, which is that as business leaders, we realize that if the environment is going to change, we cannot just be totally focused on our businesses. We have to be going out there, engaging the leaders. Because as President Obasanjo said sometimes, it's not that leaders want to be cynical. They just don't yet know what is required to make the environment a success, how we are supposed to work together. Africa is a huge continent. Okay, it looks like it's easy to see Africa as one landmass. Okay, but don't forget, this is like you guys looking at Asia from Laos to China to Vietnam to Singapore as if it were one country. And throw in there Myanmar and Pakistan and Burma and well, I've repeated Myanmar and Burma as two countries, but it's one. So, but you got to realize we have exactly the same issues. The development levels are different. The political issues are different. I'm surprised sometimes just that actually it's much more integrated than it sometimes looks. So what we are working towards is to create one market, push for greater consciousness that if we work together as a continent, there are more benefits. And
including power benefits, and perhaps also
Correct.
just bringing the African Union's recent free trade agreement. Obviously the African Union now chaired by President Paul Kagame, President of Rwanda, the Republic of Rwanda. 44 African countries signatories to the Treaty of the One Trade Agreement. So yes, we are making progress in that regard. We can leverage power resources across the continent as well, start leveraging off one another, Strive?
Sure. I think what power needs is the sort of boldness that we saw on the telecommunications sector. If what President Obasanjo was prepared to do on telecommunications were done in Nigeria, around the way to bring the incentives for the private sector to come and build power. With so little power, what risk are you taking by letting us have a shot? We can fix this power thing. It's not beyond us. But it's about the policies of accepting that the private sector could be your power providers or your water providers or your sanitation providers. It happens around the rest of the world. Well, Aliko Dangote, he's a cement guy and I'm a telecom. We may not be the guys to do it, but believe you me, there are young Alikos and young Strive Masiyiwas out there ready for the challenge to fix power.
And it could be completely transformative.
Oh,
At the World Economic Forum, we use that term leapfrog all the time. You will have both heard
the
it.
technology is there. We may do it with
So let's pause power, the stability.
It makes sense. Yes.
Okay.
You want to finish there? Go ahead.
No, I say if it makes sense, obviously, we can transform power. It's not really something very, very difficult. The infrastructure is there. And we don't really have to have one, we don't have to have one single power where, because sometimes people talk about Inga and they produce this, but we have to also look at the issues about running the infrastructure. Most countries, they can produce their own power, some solar, some coal, some, it depends on really what you want to do. But fixing power, I think if there are the right incentives and there are the right regulation, Africa can get out of their issues in the next 10 years.
Again, entrepreneurship and the success of entrepreneurship across the African continent is going to be reliant on the power resource. So hopefully we'll see that progress.
Well, it has to happen because I can assure you that future elections will depend on what kind of power you deliver. You don't deliver power, you don't get re-elected. So, and power is very, very necessary. It's not something, it's not a luxury. We need to get that to empower our own population.
I am going to almost move out of the Facebook live broadcast and then go back to Chatham House rules, but I want to close out on the consistency of government policies. As you highlighted in the beginning, that's one of the biggest challenges you have faced in building a sustainable business across Africa. Is it improving?
I think it has improved dramatically. It has actually improved quite a lot. There is more clarity right now, and part of the excitement of doing business is that when you wake up, there's also something new, not something very damaging. So we also put that mitigants, in the business, calculation. If now, for example, I'm going to do business, I will take the worst case scenario and I go ahead with it. If it doesn't pay, I'm not going to go into it. But right now there is more consistency. Few countries are still having sort of issues. There are countries that we have invested and we're still having a couple of issues, one or two, not many, so it has really improved dramatically. And, the issue that when you look at future in the next 17 years or so, by 2030, if you are not really in Africa, you won't be able to make money.
Yes, you can, on the policy
statement. And I think that certainly for those of our leaders listening, this is really what I would be saying. The big challenge for us in Africa going forward is how do we deal with unemployment of our young people? We have an extraordinary challenge of a lot of the technologies and the industries that we can build today do not create a lot of jobs. The key for us is to promote entrepreneurship. And the underpinning of entrepreneurship is, first of all, education. We have to throw ourselves at education like we've never done before. And this is a great region for us to understand what you can do in that area. And that education is only as good as we pivot with it to skills. You can be an entrepreneur, but if you have no skills to sell, to underpin what you're trying to do, there's nothing more you can do. So we have to address those two issues. We have to get education moving. We have to get skills training moving. Vocational training. Skill kids to do things with their hands. If we don't, then all our hope goes up in instability, in migration issues that will be beyond the next generation to deal with. So for me, Africa's glass is half full. Extraordinary potential. We have young, vibrant, the world's youngest population, average age 19. We can do extraordinary things. The consumers of tomorrow are African. We will be 40% of the world's population by the turn of the century. So this is where you got to be, and you start today, and we invite you to come and be partners with us.
And when we talk about those partnerships, I do just need to stress that we've got two of Africa's leading philanthropists on the stage. Strive and his wife Tsitsi have the Higher Life Foundation, and over the last 20 years, they have educated 250,000 orphans across Africa, and they also, the Family Foundation funds 40,000 bursaries on a yearly basis, again, African orphans in the education space, Strive. And then, of course, Aliko, the Dangote Foundation, and you, sir, personally seeded that foundation in 2014 with $1.25 billion US. So again, education at the heart and vocational training at the heart of what you both do. So thank you very much. We're now suspending the Facebook live transmission. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Strive Masiyiwa, Aliko Dangote, thank you very much for the interactivity.